It is Fan Mail Friday, and today we're going to discuss if it makes sense to pay Mike Williams and Keenan Allen top receiver money, and also talk about how important the 2022 season is for Tom Telesco, and if he'll potentially be on the hot seat if things go south, all on today's Locked On Chargers podcast.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers together for over 6 seasons, and this is our 5th as a host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. What's up, guys? Welcome to the show. Thank you for making us your first listen today, and as always, make sure to go follow the show wherever you get your podcast from for free on all platforms, and subscribe to the new Locked On Chargers podcast as well. We have a big show today with Fan Mail Friday, getting into a ton of big questions, maybe none bigger than if it makes sense personnel-wise for the Chargers to pay Keenan Allen and Mike Williams as top-tier receivers. But before we get into that, David, I do think we have to kind of talk about something that's going on in the world right now. I'm not going to keep it short, but I just want to say thank you guys for listening. I know there's a lot of crazy stuff going on right now. I'm definitely thinking of the people in the Ukraine, and it's tough to do things like this when there's big problems happening in the world. And I think it's just another moment for us to thank our troops, thank our veterans like David Drogemeyer here, just for making us feel so safe in our homeland that we can do something like this with bigger things like that going on in the world. So we appreciate you guys. We know people try to get away and get an escape in a podcast like this. So we hope we are providing you guys with that today. But it is Fan Mail Friday, and we do want to pay our gratitude to our fans by getting into some voicemails and also getting into some Twitter questions as well. So we will be getting into the leash on Tom Telesco, as well as what the Chargers could pay Mike Williams and if it makes sense to. But there's a lot of other things too, as well as, will the Chargers find a good player at 17? Could they just decide to throw all their draft picks on defense like the Panthers did last season? And maybe they just throw all their money at Davante Adams instead of Mike Williams. So much to get into. But I think it starts with Mike Williams, David, the hot debate. And we have a voicemail to start the show off here with Bob from Jersey. Let's hear what he has for us.
What's up, guys? It's Bob from New Jersey. Just a quick thought on Mike Williams. Dan, I think it was about a month ago, you had made a comment that I thought made a lot of sense. I don't know how smart it is to spend $30-plus million on wide receiver between two players, obviously with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. You know, it got me thinking, and I was looking into it. There really aren't any other teams that invest that much money at the wide receiver position. I think the closest comparison were the Rams with Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods, and they were at about $25 million. But after that, it drops off quite a bit. It's an interesting point, and I think it's a good one. I don't know that you can really construct a well-rounded roster if you're investing that much money in a wide receiver position. As much as I love Mike Williams and I'd love to have him back, I just don't think it's the smartest thing for the Chargers to do. So just curious on your thoughts.
I think that's a very valid point. Whoever that Dan guy is, I mean, he sounds like he knows what he's talking about for sure. But I think this is the conversation. I mean, that makes it so tough because I know, there's people planting flags on both sides of the argument. Let him walk, right? Re-sign him, extend him, just franchise tag him. We put a poll out there, it's pretty spread out with a good amount of people wanting to let Mike Williams walk in free agency. But I do think the roster construction question makes sense here, David, just because can you have that much money allocated to one position like that, even if you do have a rookie quarterback, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that you have to look at. And yeah, if you look around the league, there aren't many teams out there that have that amount of money allocated to the wide receiver position. It is very rare. And, you don't ever want to throw that much money in a normal situation into that position group. But also you have to think about what Mike Williams brings to the table and what you're getting when you pay him. So, first of all, the organization loves Mike Williams, and they've said it on multiple different occasions. Also, Mike Williams has produced in the moments that you need him the most. And yes, Keenan Allen's a third down machine. And, if you need a first down, that, 9 times out of 10, Keenan Allen is going to convert that. But in the moments to where the game has been on the line and the Chargers needed a play to stay in it, who did they go to? Who did they throw the ball to in those situations? It was Mike Williams over and over and over again. And most of the time, Mike Williams came out there and provided the big play that you needed. And for Mike Williams, it's so polarizing because you've seen a couple of very good years, and you've seen a couple of years where you can't fathom paying him top 10 wide receiver money. But you have to look at the way your specific roster is constructed as far as your salary cap situation and what that salary cap is going to look like in the next few years. Fortunately for the Chargers, they're in a very, very healthy salary cap situation, not only this year, but in the next couple of years as well. So that is going to definitely come in handy for them when they are going to have to make this decision.
Yeah, and I mean, I do think the production that Mike Williams had in like the big games, in big moments that he's had, I think do kind of, fall by the wayside with the people saying to let him walk and just want to focus on, patches of inconsistency, which I think is fair. And this is a tough decision.
It
And I've
is.
kind of stayed by that point the whole time because it is tough. I mean, going back to what Bob said, though, I mean, really, it's 40 million, right? It's not 30 million because it's going to be Keenan Allen at 20 and Mike Williams close to it, if not over it. And I don't know if the Chargers will go over 20, but it's a realistic possibility for him to get that with what the market is and just him being, on the free agent market and what another team will pay him, because that is what your market is, what another team will pay you. Chargers have to decide if that's enough, right? But there are teams that are doing close to that already. I mean, if you look at the Rams, they're actually making around 32 million. Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods are. So let's say the Chargers get Mike Williams, 17 million, right? Makes him a top 10 paid wide receiver. I think, with Kenny Galladay making 18, it's going to be hard to get under that with how little he produced last year. But let's say best case scenario, you get a 17. That's 37 million you're paying those two dudes on average.
Yeah.
On average, the Rams were at 32 million. That's 5 million less. The Buccaneers last year with Chris Godwin and Mike Evans were over 32 million. So there's teams up there. I do think you can still win with those rosters, and I do think you're going to see that change when, Tyler Lockett already has a big deal, is going to have to split time with DK Metcalf, who's going to get paid a big contract soon. So I don't think this will be the only time you see a situation like this. I think some teams are going to have to make tough decisions like this. And I think you can still build a, roster, especially around a rookie contract with those two contracts there. But if Mike Williams does get hurt or something like that, when you have that big chunk there, it is going to take away from what you have on your team. Obviously, as we saw with the Bucs when they lost Chris Godwin, right? Antonio Brown storms off the field, and it's a totally different offense. So you need those guys to obviously be out there if you're going to pay them that. Yeah. And I think the other thing is with the Chargers and Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, you might pay them that now, but in 4 years or 3 years, like what is the top wide receivers making? Because it's like Mike Williams isn't getting wide receiver, elite wide receiver money. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins is making 27 million. Davante Adams is probably going to go for somewhere around there as well, right? So it's going to be significantly under those numbers. And the
market gets reset every single year.
Yeah, and I mean, at some point, it's just going to boom. Like the salary cap with these TV contracts, now that COVID, is less of a hindrance to what the league is making on their bottom line. The salary cap's only going to keep going up. So that 17 million in this hypothetical is obviously going to look a lot different in a couple of years. And I just think, David, it is still really tough. Like, it's still a tough decision. And that's why it's like we haven't really, I'm not trying to sit in the middle either. Like, I think there's a reason it's hard, because if you don't sign him, I do think it's going to be really hard to replace that production. 1,146 yards, 9 touchdowns. It's going to be almost impossible to replace that with one person unless you go get a Davante Adams or someone that's clearly better than that. But it's still hard to justify paying him, around 20 million a year.
Yeah, thank God we're not the general manager, right? Thank God we don't have to make those type of decisions, because it's incredibly difficult. And I don't know how you can possibly think that you're going to go out there and get, somebody who's going to come in and for sure give you the type of production and also have the same type of chemistry that obviously Justin Herbert and Mike Williams have developed in such a short time. And I think that chemistry can only get better. And I think for Mike Williams, if you're him, you're saying, hey, look what I did in this new offense. Look what I did when I was featured. Look what I did when I got 120 plus targets. This is the type of production that you can expect from me if I'm continuing to be used in this similar way. So, I mean, there's obviously an argument on both sides of the token, but I've always been a fan of Mike Williams, and I am a fan of bringing him back, but it has to be for the right price. If we're talking 20 plus million, then I think Mike Williams has to walk.
Yeah, and that's the tough thing. I think, I mean, and like, what's the difference between 18 and 20 million, right? Where do you draw the line? I think that's the tough thing to kind of figure out. Will he make more than Keenan now? And it is tough to pay 40 million to two receivers. I would lean towards keeping him because I just do think he is a very, very good receiver. And I think he is a good fit for what the Chargers want to do offensively, even while you have to deal with some of those inconsistencies. But I do think if he does walk, if some team does price him out of the Chargers range, it's not all doom and gloom for the Chargers on the
No.
offensive side. There's still a lot to build around. I still think you're going to see a step from Josh Palmer in year two, but I don't think he's, the next guy or necessarily scares anyone as a number two receiver at this point in his career. You would still feel, there's a lot of questions at the wide receiver position without him, especially because after Josh Palmer, it's Jalen Guyton, right? Who's fine, right? But like, that's really it. And that's not a super scary trio of wide receivers, even with as good as Keenan Allen is. And I think part of the blame, I think, goes to Tom Telesco, essentially just because there's not, I mean, he tried to get a backup plan in Josh Palmer, but like there's not a ton there that you feel great about if you were to let Mike Williams go. And you could say the same thing about an edge rusher with a Chen Nwosu, at linebacker with Kazir White, and even more along the roster where you feel like you have to bring some of these guys back. So we'll talk about what the leash is going to be like on Tom Telesco and how important it is for him to have success this season. But the official betting sponsor of the Locked On Chargers podcast is BetOnline.net. Football might be over for the season, but basketball is in full steam for both pro and college hoops. You got March Madness right around the corner and giant UFC fights that are really, really fun to bet on as well. I mean, some huge underdogs seem to cash every time there. And the only place I use to bet on UFC and all of my favorite sports action is betonline.net, because from the latest odds, totals, player performance props to where the next fired coach is going to land, betonline.net is the number one spot for all of your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. It's not just basketball. BetOnline is your source for hockey, boxing, UFC, odds right to your Olympic coverage and your favorite biggest casino games. Now that things are wrapping up at the Olympics, head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action at BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, David. Well, I did talk about Tom Telesco to start things there, and I do think it is fair to wonder if part of this being in this situation is Tom Telesco's fault, right? For not having clear backup plans to these big free agents that you feel like you have to bring back. And Barnaby has had enough of Tom Telesco.
Fellas, it's Barnaby from the 805. I want to ask today, what kind of timeline would you give Tom Telesco? How long are we going to hold on to this GM? In my opinion, I say give him this season, and if we don't have a deep playoff run, meaning anything other than a first-round lock or basically missing the playoffs, if we don't go deep in the playoffs or win it all, I say get rid of him. I think he's earned the chance to go for it, and he's got everything that he needs in order to make it happen this year. We got enough in our payroll, cap space, draft picks, you name it. So he can't figure it out this offseason. I would like Tommy T to be gone, because I want a GM who is more aggressive and also understands that there are windows, because we all know that Justin Herbert is going to get paid mad cheddar. He's got 30-40 million a year, and at that point, who else can you really afford? So let me know. What do you guys think? What's up, baby?
All right, David, obviously we've talked a lot about Tom Telesco, especially this season and even leading up to this when Anthony Lynn got fired last season. We were wondering if Tom Telesco would still be the guy. And I mean, overall for Tom Telesco, it hasn't been a super successful tenure, but he does have a lot of successful players, right? He has a lot of big-time picks like Joey Bosa, Justin Herbert, Derwin James, Rashawn Slater. I mean, there's a lot of really good first-round picks to choose from that Tom Telesco has not just hit on, but hit a home run with, right? But he's almost like Joey Gallo in some ways, though, because it seems like it's home run or nothing with a lot of these draft classes. So, David, what do you think that the leash should be on Tom Telesco? Do you think it does have to be a deep playoff run for him to return in 2023? Which sounds really weird saying.
Yes, 100%. I am in complete alignment with Barnaby here. I'm at the end of my rope with Tom Telesco. I mean, it's been his job to come in here and provide the type of players that are necessary to win championships. Not just win games, not just win playoff games, win championships. And he hasn't done enough. He hasn't done enough to make that happen. So this year, there's literally no excuses. You have a rookie quarterback who's one of the best quarterbacks in the league on a rookie contract. You have a lot of money. You got plenty of draft picks. If you do not make it to the playoffs, win playoff games, then you have to go. They have to find somebody else. There literally is no excuse in my mind. It is a deep playoff run or a new general manager for me.
I mean, I think that's fair. I think it's fair, and I also think it's no way it's going to happen, especially if the Chargers make the playoffs. I mean, I think Justin Herbert, with this front office, with this ownership group, I should say, has bought himself leniency by picking Justin Herbert and hitting on Rashawn Slater, right? And I think he's going to get a lot of credit for that. And he deserves a lot of credit for that. I think the biggest thing is holding a microscope up to the other picks that haven't panned out. I mean, you look at the outside of Justin Herbert pick in his 2020
the
draft class.
95%.
Yeah, there's not a lot there. Even the 2019 class, the Jerry Tillery, Nazir Adderley class, not a lot of starters coming out of that you feel really good about going into this season. And I think that is part of the reason that you're in these tough spots, like I was talking about before. Like, you don't have a linebacker you feel great about after Kazir White. Maybe, Drew Tranquil, but that's one dude, right? Because you definitely don't feel good about Kenneth Murray. After Uchenna Nwosu, you can't really have Chris Rump go out there and just be the starting guy outside of Joey Bosa. Doesn't mean you can't go get a cheaper option than Uchenna and let him sign a multi-year deal. But you feel like you have to bring him back because of the lack of guys you have behind him right now. You say the same thing about Mike Williams. And you could say the same thing about Justin Jones, because Justin Jones was the Chargers' best run defender as a defensive lineman last season. And it was still not good enough for that defense. Now you feel like you have to bring all these guys in multi-years back. But at the same time, at that point, you're really handicapping the external free agents that you can bring in, and the difference making guys that you can bring in that situation. So I think with Tom Telesco, 69 and 76 in 9 seasons, 2 playoff appearances with a 2-2 record in those playoff appearances, all with Phillip Rivers and Justin Herbert. But he also has a lot of Pro Bowls and a lot of really good picks as well. So a lot of shiny things to go along with it. I definitely understand the frustration there, but let's get into the next question here. Let's go to Lewis Bensman, who has 2 questions for us we'll get into in a quick way, and that is, do California's taxes affect us as a free agency landing spot? And what did you think of the Panthers taking only defensive players? So, yes, I do think the taxes have some impact. I think it's impossible not to when you're talking about the type of money that gets taxed on a $100+ million deal. And not all of them are like that, but a smaller deal, even though it puts you in a different tax bracket, you have less money that you want to lose from that because you're not making those, hundreds of millions. I don't think it's a huge difference, and I think we've seen, the Rams get free agents. They've traded for a lot of players too, but I think they still are a free agent destination, but I do think it has to play a little bit of a factor. Now going to the Panthers, what do you think, David? Good.
I was going to say, yeah, it definitely plays a factor in it, but there's also some attractive factors as well, meaning, I don't know, Justin Herbert and, Derwin James, Joey Bosa. So there's several attractive features. Oh, and also, by the way, I can play at least 8 of my games, right, in some absolutely phenomenal weather. Yeah,
in California.
In California, in one of the biggest media markets in the world. There's some negatives, but there's also a lot of positives too.
Yeah, for sure. And I just think it's tough because then you look at a team like, in Florida or something like that, where it's like there's no income tax, right? And now you're getting all of that money that you have on that contract instead of losing, tens of millions of dollars potentially.
And does the player actually want to go out there and win games, or do they want to make the most money? Because that is something that plays a factor in it as well.
But not as much as many people think, because almost every time they're going to want to make as much money as possible in a very disposable sport that'll get rid of you with no, second warning or anything like that.
Yeah.
I don't care that much. So getting to the second part here, it was amazing to watch the Panthers draft all defensive players. Did it help their defense? I'm sure yes. I'm sure they're more talented on defense than they were. J.C. Horn didn't play a lot, so that obviously hurts you. But, the Panthers were still a really bad team. And a lot of that has to do with Sam Darnold and, who preceded him at quarterback there. But it doesn't work, even though it still would be tempting, David, especially if you go sign, bring back Mike Williams. Maybe you sign a tight end. Maybe you sign a right tackle in free agency, and you're just like, F it. We're throwing all 11 of these picks on defense.
Yeah, you can't do that because there's more than just a couple of holes, and they're not all on the defensive side. And also, you don't just draft for this year's upcoming team. People got to understand that. You're drafting to add depth for 3, 4, 5 years. That's the point of looking at the draft. You have to look at it in the micro sense, Obviously, you need help and you need people to come in and be impact players right away. But you also need them. You need to have guys that can develop and also be core members of your team going forward too. So you have to really understand the approach when you're looking at the draft.
Yeah, you do. And I think the other thing is too is like, yeah, there's a potential, hypothetical that every player that lands at you is the best player available and also plays on the same side of the ball as what you're looking for. In this case, defense, right? It's not likely, right? If you go into the draft thinking that way, then you're really eliminating the best player available kind of mantra. So if you want to be a
Yeah.
best player available type of team, you can't say we're only taking defense or only taking offense. It just isn't that easy. That being said, I love the fact that they went for it.
Love it.
We really need
Love
to
it.
improve the defense. I think they were still like the 20th ranked defense or something in the NFL last season, and their offense was like 29th. So maybe throw all the picks on offense this year, Carolina, and see if something shakes out your way. But we do have more that we want to get into on Fan Friday, so we're going to come up with a few more questions to think about in the next segment, including if there will be a good player available for the Chargers at 17, and maybe taking your money back from Mike Williams and throwing it at Davante Adams coming up after this. But I do need to tell you guys, I'm very hungry. I've been thinking a lot about Built Bars this entire time. Like, you've seen me talking about football, but the entire time I've been thinking about Built Bars because they are my favorite protein bar. And they're the one thing that's really helped me as I'm dieting for my wedding coming up very, very soon. You need something that's going to break up the monotony of a diet, right? A lot of chicken, a lot of vegetables, right? Things like that. Not the funnest things to eat. Sometimes you need something fun to eat. And Built Bars not only are great for you, and you're going to get something that's loaded with protein, 17 grams of protein in most bars, less than 4 grams of sugar, less than 4 grams of net carbs. You're getting something that tastes great and is 100% covered in chocolate, soft and easy to chew, while also being good for you. It just doesn't make sense. You have great flavors to choose from: cookies and cream, peanut butter brownie, cherry barcy is another good one, salted caramel, coconut almond. So many flavors to choose from, and they have the puffs. The puffs are great. The first ever protein infused marshmallow, and you're getting crazy flavors like banana cream pie. You could also get cinnamon churro. I mean, churro. You had me a churro. I mean, it's easy as that, and they taste great, right? That's the best part. Because if it didn't taste good, I wouldn't be able to tell you guys about it. Because it's like, I'm not going to eat something unless it tastes good. That's why it's so nice to have a Built Bar. Have something that's going to fit on my diet and something that tastes great as well. It makes me forget, makes me feel like I'm having a little cheap meal in the middle of the day. And you guys can even save some money because if you go to built.com, you can use the promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. All right, David. Well, let's power through as many more fan questions as we can today. And we have to get into our boy Zach's voicemail today, talking about where the Chargers are at a tricky spot in the draft. And I do think, David, the Chargers will have a good player fall to them at the 17th pick.
Hi, Zach from Florida here. So I don't know how you feel about this question, but what are your thoughts and feelings about where we are in the draft at the 17th pick? Now, I'm mixed about it. On the one hand, I would love a farther spot and for us to be getting a spot because we were in the playoffs. But on the other hand, when you do a lot of these mock drafts, a lot of the big players that, especially that I want or that are just big names, are all off the board by the time that we pick at 17. And it brings up a weird scenario of either getting a position that we really don't need in the first round, or you're reaching for a position you do need. Now, I know we've had success in the past of having great players drop to us, but that's not going to happen every year. So would love to know your thoughts, and go Bolts.
I think the one nice thing about this is the one thing you feel good about Tom Telesco with is picking in the first round, right? And he hasn't many times picked later than this. The only time I can think of, recently at least, would be 2018 when they picked Jerry Tillery, right?
Yeah.
But I think the other season was the Bengals season. I think that ended up, the first playoffs where Melvin Ingram tore his ACL and came back. They made the playoffs that year, won 8 games. So that would have been a later pick. But besides that, it's 17 with Derwin James, right? It doesn't usually get any later than that. And that's where we saw him pick him. And I think the hard thing here, David, is just like, there's not a lot of top 10 clear-cut guys, so it's hard to say that one of those top 10 guys is going to fall to you. But I still feel good about the Chargers' chances of not only finding a good player there, but finding a good player that's going to fit a position of need.
Yeah, the Chargers have all kinds of needs. You look on the defensive side, you could conceivably argue that you could pick a player at pretty much any level of the defense in the first round that would come in and make an impact that you would need to add. You need a corner, you need a pass rusher, you need a defensive lineman.
Probably not safety. I'd say safety is
probably
the only
not
one.
safety, right? But I mean, most of those places you could you can warrant taking a player in the first round. So I mean, there's so many different positions the Chargers need to address on both sides of the ball. And also, just because you're out there on the mock draft simulators, and I know they're fun, those are all based off of the projections that those individual companies are expecting those players to go. That doesn't mean that that's mirroring what NFL franchises and NFL front offices have as their big board. Every single year, the draft happens and players go in spots you never expect them to go. So the chances of the Chargers being able to get a good player at 17, I think, is still very strong. And even if they, say trade back, I think that there's still opportunities to add a lot of value in the draft, even with 11 draft picks.
Well, I mean, that's kind of contradictory just from the sense that, like, if there is good players there, right? Like, you're going to trade back. If you're willing to trade back, you feel good enough about the players that are there because you feel like there's still someone good, right? Maybe the one guy that you had pegged didn't make it there, so now you're willing to settle from a group of 2 or 3 other guys that are still available. But I think the hard thing about this is, like, I think the one guy that would kind of fit the mold of, hey, that guy's never going to make it there, right, is probably Sauce. Like, I think probably Sauce Gardner is, like, the guy that, like, of course, if he makes it there, you take him, right? And just take a top flight premier prospect at corner probably shouldn't make it to you. But, like, besides him, there's not a lot of guys that are either going to, like, definitely not make it out of the top 10, like the, top couple of tackles,
right?
Like Kayvon Thibodeau or Aiden Hutchinson. Like, those guys won't make it. But there's not a lot of other guys because after that, it's super ambiguous and everyone has a lot of different feelings on those guys. But with all the guys that are available and given the needs of the teams before the Chargers, which is tough because there's not a lot of quarterbacks that are going to go before the Chargers as it seems right now. And that's what's going to hurt them. But whether it's Andrew Booth Jr., whether it's a Jermaine Johnson, right? I think there is going to be a guy there that you're going to feel good about once the Chargers pick comes up. And if one of those guys isn't there, it means one of those other guys who projected to go before that right now to other teams is going to fall to you. So I do think a good player will end up falling to them. But you're right. You're not going to get generational type of players every year that just end up falling to you and having teams pass up on them like that. But let's get into some other Twitter questions here before we wrap up the show today. We have Blake's dad who says J.C. Jackson is his number one free agent that he'd bring in, kind of like David Drogemeyer. He says the question is, would it be worth letting Mike Williams walk to throw an insane amount of money at Davante and Gesicki and just seeing if anyone can stop the offense? All right, David, go ahead.
I mean, hey, you love the big names and the big contracts are always awesome to look at, but they don't always work out. And also, I don't necessarily think that bringing in Gesicki would be the move at tight end that would make the biggest impact, in my opinion. As far as Davante Adams is concerned, we know how good that guy is. The guy had 18 touchdowns in 2020. He's absolutely ridiculous. So, we know what he brings to the table. With Aaron Rodgers, we don't necessarily know what he's going to look like with a non-Hall of Fame, first ballot Hall of Fame quarterback throwing him the football. So, we know that he's good, he's great, but also know that part of that greatness was that bond and that chemistry that he developed with Aaron Rodgers.
Sure. And I think the thing is, like, yeah, I mean, if you're telling me you can have Mike Williams for 22 and Davante for 24, I'd rather pay Davante 24.
Oh,
right?
sure.
If those are my two options, which are not. But
no.
Davante's probably going to go for 26, 27. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins is making $27.25 million on average per season right now. So that's up there. And Davante Adams has every right to ask for something close to that, right? But the Chargers don't have the money to go after both of those guys. I do think there is something that, hey, let's just make an unstoppable offense and make teams keep up with us. I don't know if Davante Adams makes you an unstoppable offense. It could make you better than you were last year with a step from Josh Palmer, right? Even without Mike Williams, but it doesn't make you unstoppable. So I just think that it's nice to think about, but you're also totally, you have to at least have a competent defense. And I think the Chargers are a ways from that right now before they go out and start signing some guys in free agency. So we do have some more we want to get into here. I do want to get to Tito from LA, who has a question about Hakeem Hicks and maybe bringing some of the other boys back from that defensive line unit.
This is Tito from South Central Los Angeles. Just wanted to get your thoughts on what if we bring back Justin Jones, we sign Keenan and Linval Joseph, we bring him back. He takes a pay cut like Dwight Freeney did back in the day. I don't think nobody's going to be running on them three. Tillery would have to go on the bench or gone, but just wanted to get your thoughts. Both up.
So in this scenario, you're bringing back Justin Jones and Linval Joseph for a pay cut, like Dwight Freeney did back in the day. Dwight Freeney wasn't good when he was on the Chargers, but that's neither here nor there. And then you bring in Akeem Hicks. So couple big problems with that. Too much elderly, too much
Yes.
elder statement on the field at the same time. You have a 33-year-old Linval Joseph, a 32-year-old Akeem Hicks. Not something I want. I feel good about bringing back Justin Jones for a very small salary, right, on a couple-year prove-it deal kind of thing, and still adding on to it after that. But I just think there's too many issues with that specific trio, and trying to run it back with a couple, with a defensive line that was one of the worst in the league at stopping the run.
Well, yeah, and just with that age group, that injuries and attrition is going to rear its ugly head. So I just don't know if that's the best, roster construction idea is to add a couple of guys that are 30 plus on the defensive line. I think you need to get younger, you need to get faster, you need to get twitchier. And I think that's the way to do it. I mean, I don't know, adding, keeping the big names. And yeah, I understand, hey, Linval Joseph is gigantic. He's huge. And Akeem Hicks is a big name and he's an established presence when he's on the field. But I just don't think that you can bet on those guys, even maintaining the same level of play over the course of a year or 2 years. That's just not the way to do it. The Chargers need to get younger and they need to get more athletic.
I think the thing that scares me is thinking about the Chargers potentially, who still has to, have to make a decision on Jerry Tillery's 5th-year option this offseason, which would be something to talk about on another show. But being afraid to bring in multiple defensive linemen because they feel like they have a starter in Jerry Tillery who's going to take a huge step. That's what scares me. Because if you throw the same scenario out without Linval Joseph, but you say like a Justin Jones and a BJ Hill, now that's something I could get behind. You know what I mean? Now that's something that you have some youth there, at least something to build around there.
Yeah, Sebastian Joseph Day, right? You add one of those
exactly,
guys.
for sure. And I think that BJ Hill, could play some nose tackle. Justin Jones could play some nose tackle. It's tough when you're bringing in elderly guys, but I do think they need to add multiple guys to that position. I just don't know if those three are the right ones. But we do have another one here, David, someone that DM'd us and we told him we'd get the question on the show today. And it's Timmy on Twitter, who asked if it's possible to obtain Jarvis Landry via trade or release from Cleveland. So the main problem here, David, is I just think it's too similar of a skill set to Keenan Allen. And I think that's my biggest, pet peeve here, or something that's sticking point as to why it wouldn't make a lot of sense. I do think he could end up being released. I do think he's probably going to force his way out of Cleveland if he doesn't get some sort of deal there. But he has $14 million in base salary. And I just think that's not what the Chargers need, because he's not a big yak guy, not a big, run after the catch guy. And he's also not a big play receiver, averaged 11 yards per catch in his career. So I think that's the biggest problem.
I think you love the man who Jarvis Landry is. You like the leader that he is. That's definitely unequivocal to me. I'm definitely a fan of Jarvis Landry. But
is this a Hard Knocks?
No,
is this because the Hard Knocks?
No, not at all. I just like Jarvis Landry as a man. I mean, just what he said and how he's carried himself. I think he's a solid player for sure. But I don't think, like you said, I don't think he adds a skill set that is going to add a different dimension to this Chargers wide receiver core that is already present currently.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't like him as a replacement for Mike Williams, and I don't like a top 3 receiver, or top 10 or top 3 receiving core of him, Josh Palmer and Jarvis Lane or in Keenan Allen, right? I just think that's a little too similar as far as their skill sets, going heavy around route runners without really having a lot of deep speed or deep ball ability out of the 3 of those guys to this point. So I do think it is something to watch. I mean, I do understand it because he is a good player. You want to bring as many good players as possible. But I think that would just be the big sticking point for me, is why it wouldn't make a ton of sense for the Chargers, given their current, roster construction with Keenan Allen already making that much money. The only thing worse than having, $37 million on 2 receivers is having $35 million on 2 receivers who pretty much do the same thing. But that's going to wrap things up for today's show. Thank you guys to everyone who contributed, and sorry to those who we couldn't get into on today's show. We appreciate you guys getting involved on a Fan Mail Friday. And to make sure to follow us on Twitter at LockedOnOAC, so you get out there and see the Twitter post when we put it out, and call into 323-524-7924 to get on the Locked On Chargers voicemail line. On Monday, it's exciting because we're going to have our first ever mock draft Monday talking about second round prospects for the Chargers, because I do think there are some talented players who could fall into the second round and some fun guys to discuss there now that we've gotten into some first round picks, a lot of first round picks potentially for the Chargers. So make sure you're here for that. And we're also talking about Mike Williams potentially getting franchise tag soon. We have a lot more going on next week as we get closer and closer to free agency when these big decisions have to be made. But you can follow me on Twitter at Dan Talk Sports and David Drogemeyer on Twitter at DroTalkSD. Make sure to go subscribe to the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and follow the show for free on all platforms, wherever you get your podcast from. And make sure you guys tune in as always and get the latest on the only place you're going to find daily Chargers content, video and audio. But we'll be back with you guys on Monday for Mock Draft Monday. Until then, take it easy and go Bolts.